Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on a very busy news week here in the nation's capital. We know many of you have been following it all day with interest. We hope in the next 30 minutes to break down some of those headlines, to give you a recap of where we're at in this dramatic turn of events of the last 24 hours here. Impeachment now gripping this town. To help me understand where things stand, our Chief Justice Producer Jack Date is here. We also have our full Capitol Hill team as well in store, Jack. But let's just begin with where we've come. Just in the last day, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announces this impeachment inquiry. Then this morning, for the first time, we get our hands on a memo of the phone call that set all this into motion. And talk us through, Jack, here's what we know. Three big headlines from this document.
Right. The three big headlines are the president pushed the Ukrainian president to investigate the president to his chief political rival right now, Joe Biden and his son. The president offered that his attorney general would assist in this process, would engage with the Ukrainians to help with this investigation, and that the DOJ, when this sort of moved up the chain and got into DOJ's hands, they reviewed this and they didn't see a criminal violation and they didn't pursue it.
And the DOJ, of course, the president's DOJ, very friendly there. That sparked controversy among Democrats. They want to see the whistleblower complaint themselves. Right. They, of course, now beginning to investigate all of this.
And also calling for the Attorney General's recusal, who's central to this whole transcript.
Exactly. And then today, we also got to hear from the man at the center of all of this, the Ukrainian president himself. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's in New York for the United Nations, had a pre-established meeting with President Trump. And here's what the Ukrainian president had to say about the call we learned a lot about earlier today.
President Zelensky, have you felt any pressure from President Trump to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden?
I think you read everything. So I think you read text. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved to democratic, open elections of USA. No, you heard that we had, I think, good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
In other words, no pressure.
All right, the Ukrainian leader, President Trump, they're saying no pressure in this phone call. It's a subjective measure, no doubt. There's certainly evidence in here, Jack, of indirect quid pro quo, perhaps the president withholding military aid from the Ukrainians at a time that he wanted them to investigate his political rival.
Right. In fact, the thing that sort of brings up the whole investigate my political adversaries thing in the conversation was when President Zelensky asks for, he's saying, I want to buy more javelins, which is javelin missiles. They're anti-tank missiles. And the president immediately responds by saying, I would like you to do a favor, or I would like you to do us a favor, though. And then he sort of gets into this, investigate Hillary, find the server and things of that nature.
And his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, will be in touch as well, someone who, of course, is not in a position of the United States government, which adds a whole different dimension to this.
Some time ago, though, you'll remember Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who's now in prison, testified before Congress. He talked about how the president doesn't always come out and say things. Cohen said that he speaks in code. The question is that what we're seeing here?
That's right. Is there an implied pressure, even if the Ukrainian president won't publicly admit to feeling any? Meantime, it certainly caught the eye of this whistleblower who shared it with the inspector general. And just moments ago, the third big development today is we've learned that the whistleblower and that complaint will now come forward. They will be shared with Congress later this afternoon. Devin Nunes, the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, making the announcement a short time ago. This all ahead of a big moment tomorrow when Joseph McGuire, the acting DNI, Jack, will sit down on Capitol Hill and take some questions about how all of this has unfolded and what so concerned officials in the intelligence community about the content in this call.
Right, and it'll be interesting to see if he can speak freely about the decision-making process, about how this complaint came to them, how they decided whether or not to let it move forward, and what it meant to them to see these kinds of conversations going on. Because there's a broader sort of implication when you have compromises like this, potentially, that it's not ideal for a foreign power to have leverage over the United States, and possibly because if the president asked for something that may have been deemed inappropriate by some, that could be an intelligence problem as well.
Democrats considering this the chip that broke the dam, a pattern of behavior from the president. The president today continuing his theme that all of this amounts to a witch hunt, speaking out about Speaker Pelosi's opening of an impeachment inquiry. Here's that.
The letter was a great letter, meaning the letter revealing the call. That was done at the insistence of myself and other people that read it. It was a friendly letter. There was no pressure. The way you had that built up, that call, it was going to be the call from hell. It turned out to be a nothing call, other than a lot of people said, I never knew you could be so nice. So part of the problem you have is you have the fake news. You have a lot of corrupt reporting. You have some very fine reporters and journalists, but you have a lot of corrupt reporters, a lot of corrupt journalists. I would rate you right in there, by the way.
And the president defending this phone call, Jack. Republicans largely rallying around him today. We've seen very little criticism, although there's some private grumbling about the content of this call. Catherine Falders covers Capitol Hill for us. She's up there right now, been talking to a lot of lawmakers. Catherine, I want to get your reaction to what we heard from Lindsey Graham. You were there, close ally of the president, senator from South Carolina. Our team asked him, how do you feel about what the president had to say to the Ukrainian? Here's his answer.
The phone call, to me, was nothing wrong. I talked to him this morning. I said, Mr. President, I applaud you for releasing the transcript. He's worried about the chilling effect it will have on future conversations. I think we should all be worried about that. I told him, Mr. President, the desire to get you is unending. They were calling for your impeachment before they even knew what was in the phone call. I've read the phone call. I was quite frankly impressed with the fact that you would release it, and the phone call speaks for itself.
What was his mood on impeachment?
He just, I think, stunned more than anything else.
All right, Catherine Falders, Republicans united here. Catherine, not a lot of criticism for the president.
No, not too much, obviously. You've heard from Mitt Romney, for example, who was critical of the content of that call and not critical of Speaker Pelosi. But you're right. You just played Lindsey Graham. You've seen Republicans over here on the House side, the ranking members of these committees investigating the president, come out and say, look, they released the whole thing. There is no wrongdoing in this call. But obviously, you're hearing something different from Democrats up here who says this fuels their inquiry up here, Devin. They have the full transcript. The president has admitted to asking a foreign leader for help investigating a political opponent, Devin.
And that is an extraordinary thing. I think we'll have to wait and see, Jack, how the American people digest this. But to see a sitting American not only ask a foreign leader to help investigate his political rival, but also to deploy potentially resources of the United States, the Attorney General,
right.
For example, about something that there isn't any evidence really to corroborate some of these allegations. Also, they were years earlier, 2016, I think this Biden incident was. So to come out now, the timing is also troublesome to many people.
It is quite troublesome, quite curious, and it raises, for the Congress, they're going to have to sort out whether this amounts to an abuse of power or something that they're that's really sort of what triggered this.
Now, a lot of people wondering, did the president break the law? Is there a law at issue here, or is this more about politics? How do you parse that question?
There may be. Now, the Justice Department says they considered whether or not a campaign finance violation was part of this, and whether this amounted to a campaign finance violation. The problem is they couldn't quantify what the effort by the Ukrainians would mean in terms of the campaign finance law. They couldn't fit it into the statute. But constitutionally, there are other crimes that the Congress gets to interpret. They can decide what a high crime and misdemeanor is. And, if you look back at the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, one of the elements was an abuse of power. And it talked about how he was in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States. Among that is protecting the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so, was the president, by asking a foreign power to interfere, violating his oath? And that might be one of the things that Congress will consider.
Certainly a norm that they're going to look at. For a little bit more on how this impeachment process, a political process, you covered the Clinton impeachment, so we'll tap on that now as Jack plays out. I want to bring Catherine Faulders back into the conversation. I also want to put up for our viewers a pretty neat flowchart that we have here at ABC News Live and ABC News Digital about how this process works. If you're unfamiliar with the impeachment process, Catherine, walk us through this, because we know yesterday that Nancy Pelosi said that now that we've started to get this information, that the ball is rolling on impeachment, she tasked these 6 committees, investigative committees, which have already been looking into the president, to begin to feed their best case to the Judiciary Committee. What happens from there? Where do we go? How does it actually work?
Yeah, Devin, so she's doing this a little differently than impeachments in the past that have begun with a vote on the House floor. But what she did, as you mentioned, is announced a formal impeachment inquiry and tasked the 6 chairs who are investigating this president with continuing to do their work investigating it. And then through sources, my understanding is that evidence that they have, they will then turn over to the House Judiciary Committee, chaired by Chairman Nadler, who will then make a determination based on that evidence to then refer articles of impeachment to the House floor. And in terms of timeline, obviously this is still a bit up in the air, but I'm hearing that hopefully they're hoping that this will get done before the end of the year.
And we will see if that vote is held. It's 218 votes, a simple majority to pass. Catherine Faulders, thank you for that. Let's bring in now an expert on the impeachment process, Margaret Taylor, a friend of the briefing room over at the Brookings Institution around the corner here, also a senior editor at the Lawfare blog. Margaret, thank you so much for coming in. So where do we go from here with impeachment? It sort of seems to me like we already have the votes, that this is, there's really no investigating needed, right? I mean, Democrats could do this tomorrow if they wanted to.
I'm not sure that's true. In terms of the number of House Democrats that have said there's, I think, something like 210 that said they favor an impeachment inquiry. Whether all of those folks would say, yes, they favor actual impeachment at this point, I think is a different question. But so I think it's a little bit hard to say exactly how it unfolds. As you said before, a number of different committees have been tasked to do further investigation and send that information to the Judiciary Committee. And then Chairman Nadler will have the job of collating all of that information, deciding what types of articles of impeachment the Judiciary Committee is going to vote on them, and then after that, there would be a House floor vote. I do think there is this question on timing. If there's going to be months and months of investigation, that's one thing. If Nancy Pelosi is looking to really move quickly, that would be a different thing. I do think that this call memo and potentially the testimony tomorrow could speed up that timeline potentially, because this is some pretty kind of amazing, explosive stuff, in my view, in particular in this call memo. And we'll have to wait and see whether the committee gets the full whistleblower complaint.
Yeah, exactly. We understand that some of that's been transmitted to the Hill this afternoon. We should say our whip count, to your point, Margaret, is at about 205 House Democrats so far have come out publicly supporting the inquiry, different than supporting a vote on impeachment, of course, to get to that point. But some of our viewers asking on social media, Margaret, what would this do? What does it mean if they do hold a vote? People remember the Clinton impeachment, but what would this do for President Trump if Nancy Pelosi holds this vote by the end of the year and they do impeach him? So what?
So if he is impeached, then the whole matter gets kicked over into the Senate for an actual trial in the Senate about whether to convict the president on the articles that he's been impeached on. So that's a whole separate process, and it's very unclear right now how that might play out in the future. As folks said earlier, Senate Republicans, at least for the most part at this point in time, seem to be still defending the president, or at least saying, this was inappropriate, but not necessarily impeachable. So we'll just have to watch and see how that unfolds over time. In particular, if the House investigations reveal a larger picture, a bigger picture about the conduct that the president has been involved in, and about, in addition, conduct that someone like Bill Barr may have been involved in.
Yeah, he's kept a very low profile so far on that front. Margaret Taylor, thank you so much for your time, for coming over. Speaking of significant, it would be significant if Republicans, any Republicans, broke and went in favor. The closest one, Jack, Mitt Romney, perhaps predictable today, he danced close to the line of saying that this could be an impeachable offense. Let's listen to it and I'll get your reaction.
My reaction was the same as I had a few days ago, which is this remains deeply troubling. And we'll see where it leads, but the first reaction is troubling. If the President of the United States asks or presses the leader of a foreign country to carry out an investigation of a political nature, that's troubling. And I feel that. And so clearly, if there were a quid pro quo, that would take it to an entirely more extreme level.
All right, so there's Mitt Romney there getting the most critical we've seen of any Republican of the president. Jack, I mean, for comparison purposes, looking back at the Clinton impeachment, when we got close on Nixon, were any of the party of the president, where was support at that time?
Well, so, the end for Nixon was when his Republicans came to him and said, we can't help you, and the dam broke and he had to resign. But for Clinton, his Democratic allies stayed with him. They stuck with him all the way through. They appeared on the White House lawn after that vote was taken, standing shoulder to shoulder with the president, and because he'd survived it. And even though he was impeached, the Senate did not convict, and he had survived it. So, for Mitt Romney, he didn't support the president in his candidacy, but then he came to his side, had dinner with him. He was possibly even considered to work in the administration. He's been on again, off again, and in terms of the support. Yeah, and
the president was quite critical of him on Twitter earlier this week as well. So we will see, though, if any other Republicans join that. I want to bring in a key Democrat right now, live from Capitol Hill for her reaction. Catherine Clark, Congresswoman of Massachusetts. She's the vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today. So let's start with the breaking news, with the fact that your party is going to be able to see this whistleblower complaint. I understand maybe later this afternoon, and question the DNI tomorrow. What are you hoping to hear? What are the questions you want answered from the acting director, Joseph McGuire?
Yes, I am heartened that the members of the Intel Committee are going to be able to review this classified document, and we will see where this information takes us. We are looking forward to the hearing, because what Democrats are working for is getting the facts out to the American people. We have allegations here and, frankly, an admission from our president that he used and threatened our national security in order to have political gain. And so we are going to take every piece of information that we can about this whistleblower complaint and make sure that the facts are before the American people.
Talk to me about where your party, the state of your party right now on the question of impeachment. We know that just over 200 of your members have come out in support of the inquiry publicly. But do you think the votes are there right now if a vote were held today? Have you seen enough facts that you think the party could have the vote today and impeach the president?
Well, what we've seen is a president that has admitted, and his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has admitted that they were willing to engage a foreign government and ask for an investigation of an American citizen. That is an abuse of power. That is a threat to our national security. And what Democrats are united about is getting to the bottom of this, protecting the integrity of our elections, making sure that this corruption does not go unchecked.
And what does all of this accomplish if at the end of the day the Republican-controlled Senate surely won't convict the president here. Some critics, even on the left, say this is a fool's errand. What do you say to that?
I would say that defending our Constitution, defending the integrity of our elections, making sure that we're rooting out corruption in our government is always the right thing to do. And the fact that we don't know the end of this chapter of history, that we can't foresee that, does not mean that we don't proceed boldly and that we stand up for our Constitution and that we be that check to a president who has demonstrated time and time again he doesn't respect the rule of law. He sees himself as above it. And this time, we have a whistleblower who has alerted us to what is being called by the intelligence community something that is both credible and urgent. And that is how we are going to respond, with urgency and with the utmost care to get the story and the facts and the truth in front of American people.
And finally, Congresswoman, as the vice chair of the Democratic caucus, you're very close with the speaker. We know that she's been very reluctant, given the political risk involved with the impeachment process, to go down this path. Is there any concern on your part about a backlash in public opinion on this, given how the polling has been? I mean, so few Americans actually support an impeachment process right now.
Devin, what I can tell you is that when I traveled around this country in the midterms, I heard everywhere I went, small towns, red states, blue states, big urban cities, that Americans do care about corruption, that they understand that when we have corruption, when we're working for personal gain or only for special interests, they're cut out of the conversation here in Washington, and bad things happen to their families. They're concerned about health care. They're concerned about jobs and rebuilding infrastructure. But they understand that corruption is corrosive to our very democracy. So we're going to do exactly what we said we'd do when we take the majority. We're going to continue to put the American people front and center here in Washington. And that means, boldly and courageously moving forward when we see the type of corruption that the president has exhibited in this particular case.
Congresswoman Katherine Clark of the great state of Massachusetts, the vice chair of the Democratic caucus. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for coming on the briefing room.
Thank you, Devin.
And let's turn now here at the back half of the show, Jack, before we go to Ukraine for a live report, talk briefly about how Republicans are trying to counter all of this. They make the argument that the president's urging of the Ukrainian leader was also an effort to fight corruption and uphold rule of law. And they put out this talking point today, the Republican National Committee, that what the president was simply trying to do was to ask the Ukrainian leader to look at a legitimate concern about former Vice President Joe Biden, who has bragged publicly, it's true, about his role as vice president, to shut down the then what a lot of people thought was a corrupt prosecutor in that country. So President Trump says it's appropriate to look into that, Jack. What's the answer to that talking point?
So there are ways to predicate investigations, and there are appropriate channels to do that within the Department of Justice. We have a huge investigative apparatus that works for the president, effectively. They answered to him. And so there are proper channels and appropriate channels to do that, but those investigations have to be properly predicated. In fact, the president has, really felt vilified by the whole Russia investigation because he claims that it was not properly predicated, that it was a witch hunt, that it was improperly initiated by people in the Justice Department, people in the intelligence community, and that matter is still under review by the Justice Department.
Even if this was a legitimate concern, to go about it by sending your personal attorney behind the scenes, by leveraging military aid, perhaps in a phone call, is not the right way.
It's exactly the kind of thing that he claims happened to him and is inappropriate. And it's again, that matter's still under review, but there are appropriate channels, and the Justice Department needs to follow those.
Let's get the view from Ukraine now. Our Patrick Ravel joins us live at this hour from Kiev, Ukraine. Patrick, great to see you. You've been doing some great reporting over there. Let's just start. What is the view from Ukraine right now? What are people talking about over there in the media, and you're hearing from officials there? What's the reaction to this drama?
So, I mean, for the officials, obviously, this is not a comfortable position to be in. They really are sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and a place they really, really don't want to be, which is where they feel they run the risk of either upsetting President Trump or upsetting potentially the next president of the US if it happens to be a Democrat. And so they feel that basically the best thing they can do is say absolutely nothing, which is what President Zelensky has spent the day desperately trying to do while pursued by these huge crowds of journalists. And so that's basically what we're hearing, is that, you know, they really wish they were not in this position. But of course, that is where they found themselves.
It sure is, and there's been so much talk now about the corruption in Ukraine, Patrick. Here we're learning, the American people are really learning for the first time some of the detail about the Ukrainian government and you know, the troubles there. President Trump trying to spin this as he was trying to do his part to shut down the corruption. Could you give us sort of a big picture sense of the history in a nutshell of corruption in Ukraine, and how Zelensky is really a political outsider that came in vowing to clean this up, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's very much how he was appointed. And I think, you know, in order to understand really this story, you do have to know a bit about Ukraine. And in particular, that I think what a lot of people are wondering is when they hear, they're wondering, what is it, this allegation that is being made that President Trump is trying to get investigated, and whether it's legitimate. And so, you know, it's one of the things that we've been trying to look at while we've been here, is that we have been trying to evaluate the allegation that Joe Biden forced out this prosecutor that forced him out of his position in order to protect his son. And what we're hearing here is really that the facts just don't support that timeline, you know, just don't support that theory. Basically, in part because from what we have been told by officials, and now I should say including by officials who are actually in the office of this prosecutor, that in fact this prosecutor was not making any kind of attempt to to investigate a company that was connected with Joe Biden's son, Hunter, but in fact had actually stalled this investigation. His office had actually sabotaged the investigation. And so what we're seeing is that, in fact, if Joe Biden had wanted to protect his son, it would have been quite strange, in fact, for him to have forced out this prosecutor. And, you know, really what we're finding is that ultimately, you know, the source as well of these allegations that, you know, Rudy Giuliani has played such a big role in pushing it. Where did these allegations come from? They came from another prosecutor general here who was fired by Zelensky over the summer. His name is Yuri Lusenko. And basically, these allegations that Biden you know, fired this prosecutor to protect his son initially came from this man. And I was talking with an official inside Lusenko's office, inside this prosecutor general's office, who said to me that actually everyone knows that, in fact, the reason this prosecutor gave this information and gave this narrative to Giuliani was that it was politically motivated from his perspective, and that it was because actually this man, Lusenko, believed that under Zelensky he would be fired, and that therefore he needed to try and get the US to try and on his side and help him. And it sounds like a slightly crazy scheme, and in fact that's how it's perceived by most of the Ukrainian officials that we're talking to. And it was seen as a desperate bid by this prosecutor to try and get the US involved in Ukrainian politics. And what remarkably has happened is actually rebounded the other way, and has had this really totally unexpected impact of now that we have impeachment proceedings going on against the President of the United States.
Yeah, and what a complicated picture for people to try to digest as well. I think this is going to be a really tough one as it's litigated in the media, Jack, because the president, we know, is going to go on the offensive. We know the RNC is already doing it. The Trump campaign is doing it, spinning, trying to put chum in the water about what Patrick's talking about with former Vice President Joe Biden's son spending time over there in Ukraine. He was, in fact, on the board of an oil company, Burisma, while Joe Biden was vice president. That all is true. But as Patrick has reported here so smartly, the actual reason that Joe Biden, as one of the head diplomats for the Obama administration on Ukraine, was pushing for the ouster of that prosecutor wasn't necessarily because he was trying to help his son, but rather because it was part of a global effort at the time to root out corruption and actually pursue further investigation of Burisma, because this guy was sitting on the sidelines.
Exactly. So, you know, it appears that, you know, the international community wanted this investigator, this prosecutor gone, and Joe Biden and the U.S. joined that chorus of people saying, "Hey, get rid of this guy." And
we can say, though, can't we, that the optics probably weren't very good for the former vice president at the time, because there are these facts that are out there. They don't look so great for Joe Biden right now. Hunter Biden was on the board, was making a lot of money in the Ukraine, and at the same time, the former vice president was lobbying to get rid of this prosecutor.
And ultimately, these may have some bearing on Joe Biden's political future, but there's also a set of facts here that are really going to caused some heartburn, some Maalox moments over at the White House counsel's office in dealing with what's in this transcript.
Right. It's a very complicated picture. But back to you, Patrick, because I was also struck by some of your reporting talking to aides of President Zelensky about this phone call and the military aid that was withheld. We heard Zelensky today say he felt no pressure from President Trump. No big deal. But you have heard from people close to the president there that actually the whole pretext for having a phone call was that there had to be some sort of guarantee that Joe Biden could have been a point of discussion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was speaking, with an advisor to President Zelensky earlier today, and he said it was clear to people in his circle that after he was elected, they wanted to have a conversation with Trump. They wanted to have a phone call, as many leaders do, but that they kept finding, and that they understood that the only way they were going to have this call was if they agreed to bring up Joe Biden, and so they basically perceived it as a sort of precondition for this call. Eventually, they spoke, and obviously, as we now know, they spoke about Biden. And the way that this advisor put it was essentially that the Ukrainians have decided, well, we have to kind of just he's going to bring it up, and we just have to try and be as neutral as possible and say we'll look into it. Effectively, that was the position and that's certainly the position they would like to be public as well now, obviously.
And that they have not started an actual investigation, as we understand it, right, Patrick?
Yeah, so not only have they not started one, as far as we understand, all the people that I've been talking to, they simply say it's not possible really to start an investigation because, as we just said, the timeline doesn't work, and that the facts just don't fit with it. And ultimately, the key thing, of course, is that what they keep repeating is that if President Trump had a genuine concern about this and knew something about Joe Biden, then why haven't U.S. law enforcement made the request, as would usually be happening? Why haven't normal channels been used to make this formal request to Ukraine to begin investigations, which is what they, of course, would normally do, and they say they would be willing to do that if that request came. But, of course, they say it hasn't.
And we should point out at this point in the conversation, Patrick, thank you, that former Vice President Joe Biden has issued a statement this afternoon on the substance of the president's allegations that we've been talking about here and reporting on in the Ukraine. Here's what the former vice president had to say. That Biden has now come out in favor of impeachment, so the House has to do its job and hold Donald Trump to account for his abuse of power. I must do mine and remain focused on making my case for a vision for the American presidency, and that will mean real help for those who need it in our country. Biden has repeatedly dismissed the allegations surrounding his son. He has denied talking about his business with Burisma while he was vice president, although he was a little untruthful there because he has admitted that they spoke about it at least once. And Jack, the president signaled today that he's not going to let up now on this sort of conspiracy with the Bidens. He's going to maybe focus on what was happening in China as well.
Yeah, and it sort of begs the question: is the U.S. is the president going to pressure the Chinese to provide information on his political opponent? And we're heading down a really very perilous path for the president.
We'll have to see where this goes. Let's go back to Patrick Ravel one last time, Patrick, because the final thing I wanted to get your thought on was the role that Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, played in all of this. We heard, or we saw rather, in the memo outlining this controversial phone call that the Ukrainian president brought up the issue of Rudy Giuliani unprompted during the call to suggest that he had an in with someone connected to the White House. How has Rudy Giuliani been received over there? Was he seen as simply a private attorney trying to look into some political dirt, or was he seen as an official emissary of the White House?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was interesting to see, actually, in the transcript that President Zelensky brought it up so readily that actually we'd love him to come. Because what has happened in reality is that Rudy Giuliani, at one stage said he was going to come to Ukraine, and then there was a public uproar around us. You may remember this was back before the summer, and he called off his trip to come here. What my understanding from talking to Ukrainian officials is that, of course, they immediately see him as a representative of the White House ultimately. And one thing that was interesting that I was told here was that actually that Rudy Giuliani had been very eager to get into a meeting with President Zelensky before he became president. That is, in between his election, but while he was still president-elect. And one of the reasons they felt that was that once he arrived, once President Zelensky had become president, any meeting with Giuliani would, of course, be much more formal and would have to be treated as some kind of more formal representative of the White House. And not only was obviously Giuliani apparently concerned about this, but the Ukrainians themselves were also very wary of finding themselves obligated to do something by meeting with Giuliani. But at the same time, a representative of President Zelensky, a very senior aide of his, met with Giuliani in Madrid back in July. And as far as we know, he made sort of non-committal promises to investigate. That was the last that we know about that meeting.
Rudy Giuliani stirring up a lot of angst on Capitol Hill, freelancing foreign policy. Of course, as we've said earlier, not holding any official role with the United States government. So we will see where that goes, Jack. Patrick Reveal, live for us from Kiev, Ukraine, where he has done some terrific reporting. You can find more of it at abcnews.com, and we'll have more from Patrick through the week and as this story continues to unfold with connections to Ukraine. Thanks for sticking with us here at ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer, joined by our senior justice producer, Jack Dott. We're having continuing special coverage here in the briefing room of today's developments involving the impeachment push against President Trump and this controversial phone call from July with the Ukrainian president. We're awaiting a press conference from President Trump in New York City right now, wrapping up his visit at the United Nations. Let's take a live look. I think we have it of the room there. The president's expected any time now. This will be his traditional press conference, wrapping up 4 days of meetings with world leaders. Of course, this visit to the United Nations overshadowed by this controversy that broke last weekend, stemming from this whistleblower complaint, now developing very quickly into a full-blown impeachment inquiry here in Washington, really gripping this town. We're going to await the president here at this time, but also take a look now at what we learned today. Jack, take it away for us in this document that came out early this morning from the White House, an unclassified readout of this 30-minute phone call.
Right. So, going through this phone call, it starts with some pleasantries. But then pretty quickly, at the end of the second page, you have the president of the Ukraine saying, hey, I want to buy some missiles, some anti-tank missiles. The president immediately says, I would like you to do us a favor, though. And, those favors include investigating a server that he's been somewhat obsessed with the server.
Right, he goes back to 2016. He wants the Ukrainians to look into Hillary Clinton's emails.
Right, presumably he's talking about that. He seems to say enough buzzwords that we think that's what he's referring to here. And he talks about having the Attorney General call their people. And eventually he gets to investigating Joe Biden.
That's right. Then the president says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, Joe Biden. Wanted the prosecution to stop here in the Ukraine. He says we should look into that, bring the Attorney General in. President Zelensky, who's told us earlier he didn't feel any pressure, did reassure President Trump, says we will look into the situation, specifically the company that you mentioned at issue. The president replies, I'll have Giuliani give you a call, and I'm going to have the Attorney General call as well. All of this troubling. It then goes on, the Ukrainian leader, to drop that he stayed at Trump Tower in New York City on a visit there, perhaps to curry favor with President Trump. The president says, I like that, and then seems to dangle what a lot of people are reading as a bit of a carrot, says, hey, thanks for all of these assurances. You're welcome to come to the White House anytime. Of course, any new leader, young new leader, would like a White House visit, Jack.
Right before he said that, he also says, I will tell Rudy and Attorney General Barr to call. Thank you. And so, connecting those two, Rudy Giuliani is a private lawyer for the president, but when he's in the Ukraine, is he conducting U.S. foreign policy? Is he talking about, who knows what he's talking about? it could create problems because in this country, private citizens aren't supposed to be conducting U.S. policy. It's supposed to be government officials because they'll have accountability and oversight by the Congress.
And the context here is so important for people to understand as well. This is at a time when the president himself this week admitted he had cut off hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid to the Ukraine, which had been appropriated by Congress. At the same time that the ambassador in the Ukraine had been fired, the president had dismissed this person. So there was a lot going on behind the scenes as the president held this phone call. All of this raising some concern with the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, someone who is now leading the investigation into President Trump for impeachment. Today, he weighed in on the developments and on this rough transcript of this telephone call at a press conference. Here's a little bit of that.
I have to say that I'm shocked by both. The notes of the call reflect a conversation far more damning than I or many others had imagined. It is shocking at another level that the White House would release these notes and felt that somehow this would help the president's case or cause. Because what those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader.
We should say you can read that telephone call rough transcript for yourself at abcnews.com. It's a 5-page document. It's stamped unclassified. The president making the decision, Jack, to declassify this very quickly. Let's remind our viewers what this document is and what it isn't. All of the president's phone calls with foreign leaders are listened into by note takers from the National Security Council. Right. So this is not a verbatim transcript. This is sort of an account.
It's an account, but nobody seems to be disputing the account. Right. I think everyone's stipulating this happened, and these are his words. And these notes, the note takers were in the White House Situation Room. It says, I mean, this is, the most sensitive place in our government, really. And to see these words on these pages is extraordinary.
It is. The day after Bob Mueller testified about his probe and concluding his probe on Capitol Hill, we learn in this document that the president spoke to the Ukrainian leader for about 30 minutes, started at 9 o'clock in the morning to 9:30. He took the call in the White House residence. The note takers were down in the Situation Room, Jack, and it was fascinating. It started as a congratulatory call. They admit in here this isn't their first call. So another question that's raised by this document is, will there be additional evidence coming out about President Trump talking about Joe Biden with the Ukrainian leader?
Right. The president repeatedly invokes, along with Rudy Giuliani, his Attorney General, William Barr. The Attorney General, for his part, the Justice Department says never spoke to the president about this matter, found out about it very much after the fact. Once the whistleblower matters were referred to the Justice Department, that's when he found out about it, but never took any action as the president is describing here.
It's just after 4:15 here on the East Coast, Eastern Time. Thanks for joining us here on ABC News Live, an extended special edition of the briefing room here. If you're still with us, we're waiting President Trump holding his concluding press conference just on the margins of the United Nations up in New York City. Of course, all of this coming after a whirlwind day of developments on Capitol Hill involving the impeachment efforts that Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker, announced yesterday afternoon. All of this also ahead of a major moment tomorrow as the Director of National Intelligence, the acting director, will sit down and answer questions about these phone calls on Capitol Hill. And as members of Congress close out this week, they have a 2-week recess ahead, so there's a lot of activity up there right now, and that's where our correspondent Rachel Scott has been doing some reporting today with members of Congress. She's also, of course, covers the Trump campaign for us. A lot to talk to you about, Rachel. Let's start with what you're hearing from members of Congress, what you're seeing up there today. Give us your hot take.
Hey there, Devin. Yeah, well, Democrats are saying that they now have even more evidence to make the case for impeachment, and they say it was handed over to them by the president. That transcript of that call between the president and the president of Ukraine, they say if it's textbook evidence, one Democrat said, if it's textbook evidence of abuse of power, then that transcript is Exhibit A. So they are using this and calling and intensifying their calls, using it as fuel for their calls for impeachment. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi if she had any reservation about launching that impeachment inquiry, which she did just 24 hours ago. Well, that hesitation is no longer there. She's saying what she saw in the White House transcript that was released confirms that she made the right decision, she feels. But of course, you have Republicans that are backing up the president. This entire showdown going on, of course, as the president is not even here in Washington, as he's over at the United Nations conference there. But Democrats and Republicans going back and forth. But the one thing that they both agree on, Devin, is the fact that they think that whistleblower complaint should be turned over to Congress. And we know that in just a few moments, if it hasn't happened already, it will be turned over to the House Intelligence Committee. Lawmakers will have a chance to read it from a secure room in the basement of the Capitol. Devin?
Yeah, and that complaint, Jack, which set this all off, is presumably still classified. Is that how they're going to treat it? Is there any chance this could come out publicly?
Well, you can never say never. I mean, to see the unclassified version of this transcript is extraordinary. And so it seems to be moving in that direction. It's hard to say whether or not we'll see it or not. But, you know, if you look at what Nancy Pelosi said yesterday about these 6 committees moving forward, you know, in the Nixon impeachment, the articles of impeachment, one of them was about his failure to respond to House Judiciary Committee subpoenas. And so there's potential in this for new crimes to be created that, you know, if he defies efforts from Congress under the rubric or under the umbrella of this impeachment inquiry to get information, to get documents, to get testimony, will that result in further problems?
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi making clear that she feels the law has already been broken by denying Congress and the American public access to this whistleblower complaint, which is, in its own right, we should say, we've gotten some new reporting in the past few hours that the whistleblower complaint came from someone inside the intelligence community who heard secondhand about this phone call, how troubling it was, and the source of the complaint heard secondhand from a White House official, somebody that worked in the White House and had access to the president's phone call, mentioned it to someone in the intelligence community, said, gosh, that doesn't seem right. The intelligence community figure, who has still not been identified, then filed this complaint, Jack, which was then in turn reviewed and found very credible and very concerning.
Right. And so, you know, one of the things that this complainant we're going to have to look at is whether or not they actually get whistleblower protections, whether their identity is protected and whether their job, frankly, is protected from reprisals. Whistleblowers have certain protections under the law. So whether those protections are extended in this case is not entirely clear, because this person was deemed really unable to go forward to the committees, and we'll see what kind of protection they have. And also, we found out today that there was some sense that this person might have had some indicia of partisanship, that this person might be a partisan or may have supported a rival political candidate at some point, but we don't know who that person specifically supported or what their politics were.
A lot of concern that and attacking this whistleblower as a political hack could have a chilling effect on future whistleblowers, especially if the identity of this person comes out. So that's sort of a side issue here, is the protection of people who come forward.
Right, and looking at the motivation potentially rather than the facts. And will that cloud and change how members of the House interpret this information and how the public ultimately
interprets it? And we do know that a lot of members of Congress have said publicly, Rachel Scott, that they're waiting to give judgment publicly about the president's conduct until they know more about who this person is that first brought this complaint forward. They want to see if perhaps there is a wisp of partisanship to this complaint, if this is some sort of an insider attack from the deep state, so to speak, if you will. You're hearing that from particularly a lot of Republicans.
Yeah, definitely. They are backing the president 100% on this, and we are just getting news that the whistleblower complaint has been turned over to the House Intelligence Committee. And Devin, this is something, like I said, both Democrats and Republicans have agreed on, a rare sign of unity from the Senate that we saw. They voted unanimously. They passed that resolution, although it was not binding, for this complaint to be turned over to Congress. This is something that both parties across the aisle wanted to see this complaint as they continue to dig through and figure out not only what was said, but what are the next steps forward on this? Now, yesterday, though, for Democrats may have been the first step toward impeachment, right? But for the Trump campaign, which I cover and I talk to Trump campaign officials, they see yesterday as the first day that declares their re-election victory. They are drumming this forward, saying that every single time that the Democrats beat this drum of impeachment, every time they clamor about this, they are only making the case for the president to be reelected in 2020. The RNC, the Trump campaign, has raised millions of dollars in the 24 hours following the announcement of that impeachment inquiry. They are not stopping on this. They think that this is going to put the president back in the Oval Office in 2020, Devin.
And that was the political concern on the part of Nancy Pelosi and other moderate Democrats in going down this path. It certainly is a political risk that they've taken. And, of course, that is the position of the Trump campaign, that this is all rosy and all to their advantage. Let's take a live look as we continue the conversation with Rachel of members now going in to read the whistleblower complaint themselves. As Rachel just reported, it's arriving on Capitol Hill. This is just outside what's called the SCIF in the basement of the U.S. Congress. It's a secure facility where you can read classified information. You're not allowed to bring any phones in or only note-taking materials, pens, pencils, and the like. So we'll see as members come and go there. But Rachel, back to you, because I want to ask you about how the Trump campaign is planning to message around this. Republicans, we know, have sort of struggled to answer whether this exchange was appropriate. The Trump campaign has already been pretty aggressive in putting out some messaging that they feel this is entirely appropriate, doubling down as the president would.
Exactly. And this is a response that they have had planned and prepared. They were not caught by surprise. They say they have had their responses well organized ahead of this already for weeks. Obviously, this is not the first time that impeachment has come up. But of course, Nancy Pelosi feeling the pressure from her party, now announcing that inquiry. But they are ready to take this on. And again, they believe that the public support is behind them in this case. They look at these polls that come out and say that so many Americans are in fact opposed to impeachment. Now, we don't know whether or not that is going to change in regards to this recent whistleblower complaint, and obviously the release of the White House transcript of that call between President Trump and the president of Ukraine. But they think that this makes no difference, right? They are trying to really divide the line here and say this is another witch hunt, another attack by Democrats on the president of the United States. These are the same arguments that they were making during the Mueller investigation. Now we're seeing them resurface again. They say this is easy, no case here. They have 100% confidence that this is only going to help the president. And not only that, Devin, this is not just about the president of the United States and his campaign. They are also targeting those Democrats that came forward and said that they believe that now they should make a case for impeachment. Those Democrats that won in districts where the president won in 2016, those Democrats that won in heavily controlled Republican districts, well, they came out, a few of them, and said, all right, we're going to make the case for impeachment. Abigail Spanberger, one of them. And now the Trump campaign is targeting them and the prospective Republicans that will be running against them in the upcoming election.
Yeah, a lot of those Democrats went out on a limb this week from Trump districts, purple districts, red districts in those states supporting impeachment. As you say, Rachel, they are feeling a little shaky on this. They hope that the facts back them up as they continue to come out. We should say the president just tweeted a moment ago about the whistleblower. We're talking about that whistleblower complaint that set this into motion. It's arrived on Capitol Hill now. The president says, I've informed the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, that all Republicans in the House that he supports transparency on the so-called whistleblower information, but also insists on transparency from Joe Biden and his son Hunter on the millions of dollars that have been quickly and easily, he says, earned over in the Ukraine and China. Hunter Biden, at one time did business in both places. Terry Moran is back now, our chief national correspondent. Terry, want to get your take on the whistleblower here. Likely this person will come forward at some point, or at least we'll learn some more detail about this. What should people look for tomorrow when the acting director of national intelligence gets grilled? What's sort of the key role that he plays in all of this?
Well, this is the person who did his duty. Joseph McGuire was, under the law, required to examine the whistleblower's complaint, and under the law, then, if he found it to be of an urgent nature, to transmit it to Congress. He tried to do that. And it was the White House blocking that transmittal of the whistleblower complaint, once again required under law, that got us to where we are. That started the ball rolling. So what he'll be able to tell us is why he believed it was urgent. He won't pass judgment on the president, but he will say that he felt clearly, because this is what he's done, it was important enough to transmit it to Congress. He also will say how he was blocked from doing that. So that'll give us a sense of the White House actions in response to the whistleblower. It gives a bigger picture of how this began to become public and of the White House actions around it.
And Terry, you've covered this White House for some time, and you know more than anybody that there is often inner tension over these decisions, infighting, a big conflict leads to resignations. We saw it certainly with Jim Mattis. We saw it with John Bolton, who was fired. We also are starting to get a picture from the Washington Post, New York Times, and others that there was a lot of infighting over the decision to release this whistleblower information and the transcript this morning. Mike Pompeo among those who protested this release. Perhaps it was a mistake.
That's right. So right now the White House is, as it has been from the beginning, almost a one-man operation. Now that it is once again fighting a fierce battle, you wonder about whether the infrastructure of this White House and whether its organization and how it's managed by the president whether it's up to the moment. Because there are people who are feeling that this was a mistake to release the transcript, to release the whistleblower complaint, because they don't have the confidence, it seems, that the president does, that he can make it look innocent and, more than innocent, part of his duty as president. This is typical of this White House, at odds with itself and not fully organized. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo now been dragged into it. Attorney General William Barr dragged into it. And what you may be seeing as their roles get revealed is what happens on many, many instances in the White House. The president will do something or say something that's slightly out of the guardrails or widely out of the guardrails or contradicts some policy that he's adopted or perhaps even some law, and there are people kind of running behind him trying to clean up. Well, that may have been what Pompeo and Barr were trying to do with what they may have believed was a call that wasn't entirely proper. Now those roles are coming up and they're getting dragged into it. Another official who's being dragged into this is Vice President Mike Pence. He went in President Trump's place to Poland and met with President Zelensky of Ukraine. What were his instructions? What did he tell Zelensky? All these people who have long careers are now really on the firing line.